Hey everyone, I'm Joel Lightcatcher, also known as Quadcopter Coach, and today was going to be a build video on this right here. This is the HellBender 305 V2 from Ready Made RC. I've been meaning to build this for a long time. It's a freestyle drone and it's really incredibly well balanced. Look at that stack, it's right in the middle. The balance point, the CG on this is amazing, but it didn't go as planned. Really, I had all the parts laid out. You're going to see that in a minute. But I also was going to use this old retro flight controller. I was going to use these new ESCs I got from Drone Dropbox. I was going to use this old Lemon RC flight control receiver and this 4-pin buzzer and lights and microphones and all this stuff, but it didn't go so well. I ended up having to replace lots of parts just to get this thing to fly. Stay tuned and you're going to see what happened in this build. It's quite a story. But first, let's see that beauty reel. This is today's build. This is what I call kind of a retro build because we're using some older style parts and some newer style parts. Let's start with the frame. This is the HellBender frame from Ready Made RC. Now, the reason I got this, other than it was on sale, was this was JC's favorite frame. JC had the great YouTube channel, Project Blue Falcon. He has amazing information on quad building there. You should still check it out. He may have died unexpectedly, but this is still a great frame to work with, and his videos are amazing. So let's talk about this frame. On this frame, we have this little rubber pad that goes with it, and this is for the battery. Now, the problem I have is I don't have anything holding this down, so I'm going to be using this third-party part. This is a riser plate that you would put on top of your stack, normally for your radio transmitter, and I'm going to put that there just to hold that in place. We also are going to be working with this flight controller. It's an older model. It's a Motolab Cyclone FC version 1.2. This is an F3 controller, and the only problem with this controller is that it was designed before D-Shot on ESCs. In my retro build, I wanted to use this old flight controller I had. Unfortunately, it died on the bench after the quad was built. The serial port just locked up and wouldn't come back. So I did my research and decided to then use a Lumineer Lux V2. This flight controller worked great, and it's just simple and basic and the closest I could find to an old style flight controller. Motor 1 has no direct memory access, DMA, so I have to remap that to motor output 5. So I'll be working on this with motors 2, 3, 4, and then 1. One of the reasons I call this retro is because I'm going to be working with this power distribution board. This is the Red Rotor V2, and this is an interesting board in that you see here we have these outputs for VTX and camera. And what this does is it not only gives you an amazingly good filtered output for your video, but it also gives you the arguably best voltage display, so you know what your power of your battery is. And that's what makes this really, really good. Also, you know it's the version 2 because the pads for the ESCs are in the corners on this model. I also got this on sale. For the camera, while we're talking about camera, we're working with the Runcam Swift V2. This also has an on-screen display, but we're not going to be using most of that because the Red Rotor is going to be giving me a lot of that information. While we're talking about video, we're going to be working with the Hawkeye race band transmitter. This one works with dip switches, and the thing that's interesting with this is we have 2 audio outs. So just for fun, I happen to have 2 microphones, and we're going to hook that up to get stereo sound. Maybe one on the right, one on the left, one on the front, one on the back. I don't know. We'll figure this out if we can work with these. We're also going to be working with these motors. I happen to have been a subscriber to Dropbox, and these motors came in that. We've got the DMX Fusion X20 2205 2522 kV motors. These are rather pretty motors, and they have very strong magnets, so we're going to see how that works out. Also in the Dropbox came with their own branded Dropbox 30 amp D-Shot ESCs, and these will work up to 4S, which is perfect for me. Strike 2. The ESCs from Dropbox were dead on arrival. After I built the quad, I could not get BL HeliSuite, either 32 or 64-bit, to talk to them. All I could get was startup tones. So these $10 ESCs were replaced with $17 DYS XSD 30 amp V2 ESCs, and they worked great. We also got some soft mounts we're going to be using, and while we're talking about isolating vibration on the flight controller, we're going to be working with these little rubberized standoffs, and these standoffs came with my HellBender, and I need a little extra space, so I'm going to be using these rubberized donuts here to even give the flight controller more isolation. So we'll see how well that works out. I'm hoping to add some lights, and I always put a beeper on so I can find my quad when it lands in the weeds. Just a minor snafu here. The 4-pin buzzer wouldn't work. I had to replace that with a 2-pin buzzer to work with the Lux 2 flight controller. And the lights, well, there's no beta flight or any way to control the lights, so there was no point in putting the lights on, so I had to cut that from the build. Oh, by the way, for the radio, I'm going to be working with the Lemon RX DSMX satellite receiver. This is kind of a, I don't want to say knockoff, but a version like the Spectrum DMX satellite receiver, and it's very nice. It's very inexpensive. I'm using this not because Spectrum is bad, but I happen to have these and they were cheap. And of course, after they were installed, I found that my Lemon RX receiver, I had 2 of them, and they were both dead, and I should have thrown them out a while ago. So I pulled the actual Spectrum receiver out of my Chameleon, stuck it in this quad, and it worked. Problem solved. We also, of course, have to have a XT60 connector, and I'm going to be working with some 14-gauge silicon wire to connect the XT60 to the power distribution board. Oh, also I've added an upgrade here. This is a camera mount, also from Ready Made RC, to help the camera to have better control and angles. The kit from Ready Made RC comes with all the parts. Well, we now have another problem. It seems the Lux 2 flight controller has a USB port that is blocked by the blue standoffs in the back. Well, the solution is I happen to have these nice red ones that are fluted in the middle, and that little gap that I get with these standoffs lets me get that plug in there to program my flight controller. Not only all these parts, but all these extra parts that I am just not going to be using, because there's so many camera choices. I didn't have to use this, I could have used this, and I got all these extra screws and standoffs. I don't even know what these short standoffs are for. I guess you can get creative with it. Anyway, I'm excited to get started, so stay tuned. Let's get this going, and let's see where we take us. See if we end up where we thought we would be at this point in the video. I was going to do a really involved build video, but instead, here's 100 seconds of the best parts of using all these parts that were no good in this build. Stay tuned. I'm ready to tin up the flight controller, but before I do, I need to know what I'm going to tin because this is really not well marked out. I'm going to be connecting to motor 2, 3, 4, and 5 as motor 1 because motor 1, well, if you remember, I mapped that out because that doesn't have DMA, and I want to run D-Shot, so motor 1 has to go over there. Take this plate because we're going to put that rubber thing in there for the battery, so I need something to put it in. So I'm going to start by putting that down first, just like that. Same goes for this. Make sure there's right, now we get to put on our flight controller. And we're going to mount it on these little rubberized screws. And the white one is just for decoration. We need to put our flight controller on. And when you do it, pay attention to that. See that arrow? That arrow points to the front, and that's very important. Take that. Put it right down on top there. Motor number 1 is unused. This is coming along really well. Okay, so we got our camera. Now we need our transmitter. Now we got to figure out where we're putting this. Both on the top. Yeah, that could work. Well, what do you think? I hope you stayed to the end of the story because now you got to see how this came to be. This came out much better than I expected. By not using the MotoLab board and using the Lumineer Lux V2 board, well, that was so easy to set up. It was a really nice board. The only funny part was, well, over here, the USB port. I don't know if you can see that. There's a standoff that's kind of in the way, but using this red fluted one, well, now I can take a USB cable like this and push the rubber standoffs just slightly, and then look at that. I can get the USB cable in and program the flight controller. And I couldn't do that without changing out the standoffs. So that was the only surprise here. But this is going to be interesting to see how this flies. It's kind of like 30-mile-an-hour gusts and rainy out, and I can't really fly this till maybe next week. But I'll try to post something later because I'm really excited to fly this. I've only been able to hover it in the front yard, and that's, well, it wasn't quite satisfying enough. I want to fly this in full acro in a big field. Stay tuned. Thanks for enjoying the ride with me. Please leave your comments below and check out quadcoptercoach.com. If you liked what you saw here, there's a lot of other free training courses that I put there. Many of them are free, and there's a few premium ones too, so you could always help me out by sponsoring my channel by taking a course. Thanks very much. I'm Joel Lightcatcher. See you in the air.